So in this video, we'll talk about entities and value types. So we can determine which ones you need to, which models you should be defined as an entity class, and which has to be a value type, right? So entities are persistent types that represent that that are first class business objects. So which means essentially we are saying that some classes are more important than others. Like for example, an item is a more important class than string. A user is more important than an address. So here this is a concept that is known as fine-grained domain models, which essentially means more classes than tables. Let's say for example we have a user table that has billing address and home address. In the database side, you'll have a single user table having 6 columns for the billing and home address. So billing underscore, street billing underscore, city billing underscore, zip code, home underscore, street home underscore, city home underscore, zip code, right? This is related to the paradigm mismatch of SQL types. Now, what happens in the domain model, right? So you have a user class that composes of an address class, right? So you have a billing address and a home address property, each one of type address class, right? So Hibernate promotes the this type of fine-grained classes. So they implement type safety and behavior. Let's say you have an email field, right? An email belonging to a user. So it can either be a string, which usually what you will define it as, but it can also be an email address class which can provide behavior like send email. Now let's define this concept. Let's say there are two people who live in the same apartment and both have accounts in caveat emptor, right? Now, now each account will be will have one instance of the user. So you have two entity instances. So user, if you have user, you have two entity instances. Now the user has as an association to home address. Now, is the home address supposed to be a shared reference, or each of the user has its own address type? So, if address is supposed to be shared at runtime, then then it will be an entity type. If it is supposed to be uh, if it is not supposed to be shared by two instances of user, then it means it's a value type, right? So that's something, an introduction of entity and value types. Now, when we talk about also database identity, so the database identity is provided by the primary key on the database, right? Now, because of the association of the value type address with the user, we say that the columns of address, the 6 columns of address that contains address information, are dependent on the user's identity. So Hibernate uh, talks about an object of an entity type will have its own database identity. It is persisted as a reference in the database. So has its own database identity. It is persisted as a reference. So each entity instance is persisted as a reference or a record in the database. An object reference to an entity instance is persisted as a reference or as a primary key value to the entity instance. Like if you have a user and a comment, the comment is a is has a reference in the database table. An object of value type, on the other hand, has no database identity, and so it depends on the it depends on the owning entity instance, right? So the lifespan of the owning entity instance is essentially is what binds the lifespan of a value type instance. Thank you.